Truth Unveiled here, keeping you updated with the latest, and today we're going to be updating you about the government shutdown and letting you know that it's now a record. It's now the longest in U.S. history. But not only that, we're also going to be keeping you updated and telling you how this affects not only you, but also your children and also your families, and also when it comes to certain benefits. And even how this can impact the rest of the world, because if you don't think that this is impacting your neck of the woods, it's time to think again. Because now I'm here at a report from Business Insider that says, from airport lines to food inspections, here are all the ways the government shutdown is impacting the lives. As of right now, the shutdown is now officially in its 24th day, meaning that it's now well into the fourth week of the shutdown. Now, while the shutdown does not close the entire federal government, however, it does still impact a slew of agencies, including the Departments of Agriculture, Commerce, Justice, Homeland Security, Interior, State, Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development. This means that the shutdown directly affects the families of around 800,000 federal employees who are either working without pay or are forced to stay home on furlough. But beyond the struggles that those federal employees are going through, average Americans who do not work for the government are also likely to see some strains along with the rest of the world. Because if America is impacted, well, guess what? So is the rest of the world. Could this be leading up to what? The beginning of the shutdown, the beginning of the collapse of the dollar. Because it says what? Longer lines at airports, fewer food safety inspections, even though we know the real agenda of the USDA and alphabet soups and the buildup of trash in national parks are only a few ways that the government shutdown is taking its toll. Not only that, but what has already started as a result of this? Riots and protesting. Do you see what this is leading up to? The purge right in front of us. Now, here is a list that we're briefly going to go over, and I'm also going to be bringing in a few more resources and articles talking about these things also as we continue to go along. Now, I will be sure to link this in the description box below so you can take a look at it on your own time. But again, this is what they're telling us. We know that it could be much worse than what they're telling us. And again, they're trying to pacify the sleeping public. But according to them, they claim that around 800,000 Americans who are employed by the government are currently furloughed or working without pay until the shutdown ends. Well, according to Trump and according to your government, it could go on for years. Again, we'll have to see, and we'll be keeping you updated as to the length of the government shutdown. But let's just assume, according to them, that it did go on for years. Now, what does that mean for people who are in these jobs who are not getting paid because of them? Could it lead to more buildup in rioting and protesting? What will it mean for these people? Tens of thousands of employees working without pay are in law enforcement departments, including the FBI, Customs and Border Protection, and the Secret Service. And we've already gone over that in previous videos about the TSA also, and how the TSA has been affected with the workers there too. Again, the question is, if this keeps going on without pay, what is this going to lead up to? What is this going to mean for airports? One option is that, well, the quality of security may be slipping according to them. But what could this mean? Is this leading up to what? More planned stage chaos all throughout the nation? And again, remember what we talked about in the previous video. It is a slow but sure thing. It's not going to happen all at once, but that doesn't mean that things are not happening. That does not mean that the pot is not brewing, because, oh, indeed it is. When it comes to air pilots and air traffic control, this has also been affected, because it says here air pilots unions have also warned that air traffic controllers are working without pay and the shutdown could make flying less safe. And then it goes on to say at the FAA, or the Federal Aviation Administration, there are fewer safety inspectors than are needed in order to ensure their air traffic control infrastructure is performing at its peak levels of performance. And this is according to the president of the ALPA that was addressed in a letter to Trump. also known as the Airline Pilots Association International. Now, again, why is this so important? Because, again, if people are trying to travel, if you're trying to make travel arrangements all over the nation, and if, keyword, if things were to get worse with the government shutdown, as your government is even saying, well, then what would this mean? How would you be able to get from one city to another really quickly? Could this be a big issue? Rental assistance from the Department of Housing and Urban Development cannot go out, risking thousands of evictions. Now, again, this is just what they're telling us on the surface. Thousands of evictions, meaning a ton of people could be evicted due to this government shutdown if it were to continue, and should it continue. But could this lead into the tens of thousands? What about the hundreds of thousands? What about stage rioting? Because what happens when you can no longer get certain food or certain products or certain items from the grocery store anymore when it comes to other shutdowns if the banks were to shut down or anything else, as we've talked about in previous videos, as your government has been doing and conducting series of tests when it comes to the ATM outages along with the shortages. And not only that, but when it comes to this also, where it says many food inspections done by the FDA have ceased, which experts, according to them, say could increase the risk of a food poisoning outbreak, even though the FDA is responsible for food poisoning. But let's keep going. Don't you see where this is leading up to? It's leading up to what? Supply and demand. Food prices are going to skyrocket real soon if the government shutdown continues, along with other things such as household items, toiletries, and etc. And so what that means is people who cannot afford these things, or people who have been laid off from their jobs, who are no longer working or no longer getting income because of this, could be affected. And if they cannot get food for their families because all of these prices are skyrocketing along with gas prices and etc., what do you think that's a recipe for? If they're already going to be evicting certain people, that means rent prices could in fact go up too. It's all a major test indeed. Now, here's one of the important ones, as we've gone over before, because this could also affect your children too, because this says here, the approximately 40 million people, which is about an eighth of America, by the way, who receive SNAP benefits, also known as food stamps, will only be able to get benefit through the next month if the shutdown continues. That means by the time it gets to March, if the government is shut down for another 6 weeks, and we're already going into the fourth one, well, then that means that what? People will no longer be able to get their food stamps. But could this affect lunchroom programs for children too? According to this report, schools' child nutrition programs are to stay funded through March, so within the next 2 months, despite the shutdown. Now pay careful attention to this next part, because while SNAP and the Child Nutrition Program are safe for now, other food programs under the USDA's purview are not, because it says here some of them are not even receiving funding. The programs that are no longer receiving USDA funds include the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, a program focusing on low-income seniors, the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children, and the Food Distribution Program on Indian reserves or Indian reservations. And Indian reservations are being affected big time by this government shutdown when it comes to funds, and I'm going to share that with you in a moment to come. Not only that, but 95% of the staff at the Office of Food and Nutrition Services, which oversees SNAP benefits and other food programs, is now on furlough and no longer receiving pay. And as we just read, when it comes to the child nutrition program, that means lunch for children if they're on these programs. Well, if the government shutdown continues all the way through the spring, well, then guess what? They're not able to receive these programs anymore. What will this mean for schools also? What will this mean when it comes to children as well? And even the prices of food during that time, should the government remain under a record shutdown? And speaking of some of the Native American tribes, funding for many Native American tribes has been cut off, including for the Indian Health Service. Funding for health clinics, food pantries, and road maintenance on many Native American reservations has been cut off. The Department of Health and Human Services Indian Health Service is also not receiving funds. Again, it's going what? It's a slow but sure process. Soon enough, it's going to start affecting everybody else. Real estate could also be affected because, according to this, it says the government is delaying some economic data releases, such as the trade deficit. The Department of Commerce's Bureau of Economic Analysis and Census Bureau are unable to release economic data due to the lack of funding. So, stats like the trade deficit, new home sales, and inflation are unavailable for the duration, according to them. And that's another thing, that during the shutdown, some of the government websites are also not going to be updating their websites, and we're going to be taking a look at that in just a moment to come. The U.S. Forest Service is unable to prepare for the upcoming fire season. The Forest Service and other federal land management agencies typically use the winter months to clear debris from forests, conduct controlled burns, and train new firefighters, even though we've gone over on this channel how a lot of this is due to what? DEWs, or direct energy weapons, microwaves, and lasers. Then it goes on to say these activities help reduce the severity of wildfires in the warmer months and prepare for the fire season. What problem? Reaction, solution, but that work is ceased during the shutdown now. A ton of national parks are closed, which means they've closed campgrounds to visitors to prevent facilities like trash sites and toilets from overflowing also. And because these parks are not open, well, what does that mean? That means there's going to be a lot of trash everywhere also, unless volunteers clean up after themselves. National monuments are also going to be closed, such as the Gateway Arch to the National Zoo, also the Liberty Bell, and etc. Now, when it comes to Social Security, disability checks, and things like Medicare, they claim that it's unaffected by the shutdown and that it only affects funds that are appropriated by Congress on an annual basis. So this means Social Security is paid for by permanent funding, therefore the checks still go out despite the shutdown. But although that's the case, well, if the shutdown were to continue, what if they decided to delay these checks? What if anything happened where they decided to say, you know what, they're not going to send them out after all? What will that mean for you and the rest of your family then? What about when it comes to disability pays and GI Bill benefits and other so-called benefits? What about this? Well, according to Task and Purpose, this says, like retiree pay, VA disability pay and GI Bill payments are both funded throughout different legislation than is at risk on the Hill. For that reason, those checks are unlikely to be affected by a brief shutdown. Notice how it says brief though. However, during the last shutdown in 2013, VA officials warned that if the closure extended beyond several weeks, which this one has so far, disability checks were unlikely to go out to more than 5.1 million veterans. Did you hear that? Again, so while some people might be receiving pay now, the question is, will this remain and will this last? How long will this last? Should the government shutdown last months or even years, according to Trump and according to your government? Again, we'll have to stay updated with that. But now I'm at the website with military benefits that says how a government shutdown will impact the military community. And it talks about military pay, where salaries for 1.3 million service members of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps are not affected by the latest government shutdown because the DoD had its full fiscal year funding approved as of last fall. And then it talks about how the banks, although not affected during the shutdown, many financial institutions that support current and former service members will offer advance pay or assistance. But let me ask you this: what if the banks were to shut down too? Then what does that mean? If the banks were to shut down, how are you getting your money out of the banks? Then would they have to enact and institute bail-ins, as we've gone over on this network? What does that really mean? Because then it goes on to talk about that and what it means for those in the military, along with retired and survivor benefit plan pay. And while they would still receive their pension checks, as the funding for these benefits is not tied to Congress's funding bill, again, what if they were to anyway try to stop this from happening? Or what if there were to be something else that could try to preclude it? Now, what's also very important to note about this is that immigration courts are also closed, because it says here, what happens to immigration cases? Many immigration courts are closed due to the shutdown, adding to an already overwhelming backlog of immigration cases. Cases of detained immigrants will proceed as scheduled, according to the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Cases of immigrants who aren't detained will be reset for after the government reopens, if it even does, with thousands of cases rescheduled so far. And while according to them, while people might in fact still receive their IRS tax returns, well, they could be delayed because it says here federal shutdown means tax refunds may be delayed. And mind you, this was as of when it was going into its 14th day 10 days ago. Now it's well into its 24th day, almost going into a month. And according to a report from MarketWatch, back in 2013, during that government shutdown, some $2.2 billion in tax refunds were delayed. And mind you, that was not even the record. What about now in 2019, now that it is a record? And due to the government shutdown, services such as E-Verify is out of service along with temporary layoffs or furloughs. Now again, they're telling us that it's temporary, but for how long? Because it could be a substantial amount of time according to them. And of course, we will keep you updated on this network. Now we're here at the National Transportation Safety Board, or the NTSB, that says due to the lapse in appropriations and government shutdown, this website will no longer be updated. For more info on available government services, please visit usa.gov. And so you see what it's all preparing for, the shutdown, because as we've gone over on this network, it's preparing for what? The internet shutdown also. Do you see how all of these shutdowns are coinciding together? Not just when it comes to even banks and the preparation thereof, but even when it comes to the internet shutdown, when it comes to the stores, when it comes to military, when it comes to governmental programs and assistance that many people have gotten comfortable with. Do you see how all of this is about to change? Not only that, but again, pay attention to the prophetic signs too. How what? That it's right on the cusp of the 400-year mark that will be fulfilled as of the summer of 2019. Not only that, but what? We also have what's coming up to the 3 supermoons in a row, not to mention the blood moon that's going to be next week from now. And if you are wondering what I'm talking about, please take a look at some of the videos that are linked in the description box below. Please seek Yahuwah and his true son Yahusha, because as you see, there is some real things taking place, real events taking place. And again, it does not just affect America, it also affects the rest of the world, because when America falls, the whole world falls too. But this is Truth Unveiled here, keeping you updated, saying as always, Shalom.